Good day to everyone. Today we have the privilege again to come in front of you to speak on a very interesting topic which we have already started in our earlier program on fundamental rights and freedom of individuals in Mauritius. This program, as we had told you already, has been created and has been carried out by the Open University under the program of community-based education, and it is in the formation of law and legal learning. Today's topic is on the freedom of conscience. It is a very interesting topic because it is not very easy to understand the term conscience. The Section 11 of the Constitution provides for freedom of conscience. We must know very well when we are born, everyone is born with a conscience. What does it mean? What is conscience? The meaning is quite simple, easy to understand, but it needs a bit of reflection. It is not something that comes from outside and you can learn in books, that you can learn from materials available outside, but it is something very internal. Conscience, as it is simply defined, is the inner voice in an individual that directs him or her to do good under any circumstances. What does it mean? Where does that inner voice come from? It manifests as a distinct voice in our inner self as we contemplate to take a particular action. It deals with a person's inner consciousness which directs him or her to take rightful decisions. It's very important for us to understand this very subtle part of our body which is not seen openly, but it is our internal manifestation which we look at every time before we make a rightful decision. And the words that have been used here is rightful decision, which has got connotation of doing the thing that is right, that is good, that is not deviating in any behavior that can be harmful to oneself or to the society. So we have to take rightful decision. And how does it come? It doesn't come from an influence from outside, but it comes from inside. This is a very subtle way of understanding oneself. It's not very easy. It needs a lot of reflection. It needs a lot of understanding of oneself to come to know if our conscience is clearly defined or not. The next point is that it is directly linked with freedom of thought. There are connections between the conscience and the thought, because anything that we initiate, it comes from the power of thinking. If we think, then we can talk and we can act. It has got a sequence that we got to follow, and the first thing is the thought process. But before we think, there is something, an internal voice that tells us to think about it. It is a right to private judgment. It's private. Nothing to be influenced from outside. It's not an external pressure. It's a private judgment that you make what is right and what is wrong, what is evil and what is good. It's your own personal speech, your own personal reaction to yourself. You are reacting to anything that you see outside and you are passing a judgment. You are making a judgment whether whatever you see, does it have the right meaning to you? Does it mean well to you? Does it have something that would say that, yes, now from here in my reaction or my response to this will be that, and how far this one will be the correct one? It is one of the basic rights that support an individual in making his own decisions based on his personal and deeply held beliefs. It is a right to private judgment, which we have already seen that it means that whatever is personal to you, you are reacting to what you see, what you feel, and you make your judgment personally without an external influence. It is also one of the basic rights that support an individual in making his own decision based on his personal and deeply held beliefs. Now, what is this personal and deeply held beliefs? It starts from our childhood days. It is the nurturing process, it's the growing path that we have in association with our family, with our friends, with our society in which we live. All these build up a foundation in our personal and deeply held beliefs. And the conscience is concretized in the way that whatever we see, whatever we do, whatever action we take, it is all filtered through the conscience. And the conscience will tell us from the background of our personal and deeply held beliefs whether the action would be correct or not. So many times, for ethical or moral reasons, we are divided whether what we think in our conscience could be correct or not, whether it is matching very well with the realities that we see outside. It continues again. What is then freedom of conscience? It is a moral tenet that holds the principle that no one may be compelled to act against his voluntary will. Each person, when you talk of freedom, he has got some set of voluntariness. He is not compelled. He is not coerced. He is not forced to do something. It's voluntary. He must do it out of his own volition, out of his own will. So when we have got that freedom, this is what it means. The voluntariness, that nobody should have any compulsion or external force to coerce, to force someone to do certain thing. So this is the freedom of conscience. It is a moral tenet. It is based on certain morality, that when we have got a conscience to actually be confronted with, or a conscience that we have to be that has been dictated to us from our internal force, then that moral tenet will obviously be judged in terms of whether what decision we are making, is it good for me and good for others as well. So it is an individual has the autonomy and freedom to choose. That part of autonomy and freedom we have got in many, many aspects, right? Taking from the house, taking the society, in our profession, wherever we go, there is a level of autonomy that we are free. We are not forced by any force. Any idea is being forced on us to dictate us that what should be done or what should not be done. It is based mainly on our own volition. We are one to decide according to the dictates of our conscience. Now we come specifically to what is the substance of freedom of conscience under Section 11 of the Constitution. It means that every citizen of Mauritius should be able to enjoy the freedom to choose, number one, his or her political affiliation. Number two, the society he or she wish to be associated with. Third, the religion or sect he or she wishes to follow and the method of praying. And the fourth one is the culture he or she wishes to adopt. And fifth is the language he or she wishes to speak. Now we come to the next topic, instances where freedom of conscience is mostly required to make a moral and ethical decision. It's a very interesting topic to know how we are connecting conscience, moral and ethical decisions. Because moral is obviously based on the issue of what is right and what is wrong. Ethical is obviously has got so much of correlation between moral and ethical that is a normative, what we should do in order to bring a society that is lives in harmony, respect to each other. There is always that level of togetherness in our society. And how do we do that? How do we bring this conscience, morality, and ethical decision together in order to make a society that is meaningful, harmonious, and very cohesive? There are certain instances where we have to make moral and ethical decision. We have got, for example, in the medical profession, we have got in the legal profession. All these are actually issues that we need to debate to find out exactly whether our decision has been dictated by our conscience based on moral and ethical standards. For example, abortion. In many instances, legally it can be allowed, but maybe from a moral standard it is not allowed. From ethical standard, it may not be possible. For specific reason, abortion, the law allows abortion, but not for every occasion, for every instances. But then the restriction is there because we have to abide by certain moral, religious, and ethical standards. Death penalty is another aspect that we have to see whether our dictates of conscience would certainly allow us to actually invoke death penalty in very serious conditions. Mauritius has gone through quite a few phases in that, and there has been a lot of debate on death penalty, but mostly it has been decided on moral and ethical decision. We have unfair discriminatory practices. Our law, the Constitution, employment law, and many other laws have also regulated the principles by which there should not be any discriminatory practices. In any instances, we cannot discriminate on any ground, because it is unfair. And when we talk of unfairness, it is simply based on moral and ethical standards. Then we have got in labor practices, in the employment relations, there is unfair labor practices concerning promotion, concerning appointment, concerning whichever way it is. When we have to practice, we give unfair treatment to our employees, to our workers. We don't give them the proper attention. We have got discriminatory practices even then, which we call unfair labor practices. Then again on medical ground, we have cases of euthanasia, where we have got to decide, that's what we call mercy killing, which we have talked about it earlier. This is a moral decision as well. And it is on the conscience of a doctor, of a surgeon, to be able to see where is the rationale of applying or actually executing in cases of euthanasia. Then we have got trespass on minority rights. We have got a lot of situations that have come throughout in the world where minority rights have been suppressed. We have got many refugees going from one place to the other. They have been not treated well, they have not been given the due recognition, they have not been given the dignity as a human being. So trespass on minority rights, it's something that is on our conscience to decide whether what we are doing is right or wrong. Then we got violation of person's dignity. Domestic violence, for example, is a violation of a person's dignity. We cannot actually compromise on moral standards here. Everyone is to be treated equally before the law. Everyone has to enjoy the respect that he or she deserves. So if we are trying to, any situation where we are minimizing, let's say child labor is also a violation to person's dignity. Then we have got making an abuse of power. Employers, for example, we have got people on the managerial position or whichever place one is occupying. If that person is not abiding to the rule of law, to the disciplines, or to how to regulate and conform to certain standards that will bring goodwill and understanding between the parties, and whenever we make an abuse of power, and mostly we make an abuse of our discretionary power. This is very important. When we make use of our discretionary power, then mostly there is something that we can do that may be unfair, that may be unreasonable, that against call on the dictates of our conscience. Next is providing legal services to an alleged criminal. What does the code of practice for barristers, attorneys tell us? Can we refuse providing legal services to an alleged criminal? The law and the code of practice doesn't allow that, because it is based on a level of conscience. That conscience is very important, that will show us that whoever comes in front of us is a human being. He needs to be treated well. He needs to be given the respect that he deserves. So therefore, in that way, the specific instances we see that there is a call for the conscience to dictate whether what we are doing is right or wrong. Finally, we have got certain limitations. The freedom of conscience as guaranteed in the Constitution, does it mean that it is a unique? It cannot be. Actually, it's a unconditional freedom, or something that cannot be questioned. There is always a perennial conflict between the freedom of conscience and formal legal principles. Freedom of conscience is our personal, but how does it conform to the legal principle that is prevailing outside to regulate the conduct of all human beings? Therefore, freedom of conscience is not an absolute right. It entails that the right to maintain behavior with the binding rules. So we have to actually look at it. If we have got the right, the freedom of conscience, we got also correspondingly an obligation to follow the rules, so that we don't have actually to see that we are hurting ourselves or we are hurting others. Because to live in conformity in a society in which our behavior should have one focal point, to maintain a civilized society. And we can do it when we use our freedom of conscience for the benefit of one and for all others. Continuing again on the limitation of freedom of conscience, there is a very important point here. There is always arise a conflictual issues between our moral duties and legal duties. In a profession, it imposes some legal duties on moral duties that may be in conflict with a person's own judgment. It is very important in our own wisdom to see how to balance this between the legal duties and moral duties. So that's why we always say to bring a fair balance, what is legal must be fair as well. It is not what is legal should not be fair, or what is fair should not be legal. It should be a proper balance between what is legal and what is fair. When we talk about fairness, it's about compliance to our moral duties. When it is legal duties, obviously we are conforming to rules and regulations that are there to regulate the conduct of human beings in a civilized society. Then finally, from the perspective of law, whenever there is a conflict between freedom of conscience, formal law has to prevail. What does it mean? Freedom of conscience, as we have already explained, it is not an unconditional freedom. It is a conditional freedom that has got a reciprocal duty that we need to follow, and it has to be conditioned by formal law. So therefore, the conflict that is between freedom of conscience, the formal law has to prevail, and this has been provided in our Constitution. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the talk on freedom of conscience, and we are going to have another talk again on the fundamental rights and freedom of individuals in the society in Mauritius, which has been entrenched in our constitution. Thank you very much.